I think we'll just get straight in there and kick off usual format. I haven't even got my FileMaker open because I had to be a bit late despite setting up for this time. Apologies, but from memory, we've got the following agenda. We've got my brief introduction, and then Gary will bring us up to date on some news that he spent hours poring over, I know, trying to resource.
I have researchers. You forget this, John.
And then we'll go with Ian is going to give one of the talks he gave at Malmo, and a bit later on John is going to talk about how far can we go with OData, and finally we have Doug Wallis joining us a bit later to talk about FileMaker 19.6. So loads of stuff. We're also going on about half an hour longer than normal before we open the virtual bar, just because we got so much to get through today. So without further ado, I will hand over to Gary to give us some news.
Right, news. As Jul rightly said, I did spend ages and ages going over all this information. I didn't. I only got to it about 3 o'clock this afternoon, but thankfully Penny was quick to trot, and she managed to pull up all the news that she's so good at finding. So I will start off with a couple of things. One of the things I wanted to highlight was a major bug to do with constrain, extend, found sets. Now the link down there explains it. It's on the Claris community. So there's an issue with basically the clients. There's no issue in 1942. There seems to be an issue in 1951. There still is an issue existing in 1954. The result of it, basically you do a find, you constrain and extend your find, and what shouldn't be sorted records become sorted records. And the example where someone does this is they say, well, if I do this constrain and find, and I've got 10 records, to make a difference because there's only 10 records. So it's not really an issue. But if you do that constrain and find and then extend on 1 million records, what it will do is it will then add the sort, even though you've done a new find. And there's no, when you look at the sort criteria that was there, it doesn't matter whether you got the tick box on or off to say, remember sorts. It just seems to be a bug in that version. A couple of people posted on it online purely because the people that have got large data sets. I have to say we're in the transition of moving to 19 still. So thankfully I've not had that, but trust me, I'm sure I would have heard about it with the amount of data sets we've got. So worth a look, have a read of it. There's a full article on the Claris blog site, so that's fine, in the community. The next one with this, which I thought was a brilliant idea. It's for all of you that use JSON. This could go completely wrong though. I want to just say, because if you get a large set of JSON data back, this is going to actually go quite large, but it basically gives you a diagram of the JSON. So it's quite nice. It literally lays out the JSON. So you can see on there, you can paste the JSON on the left, and then it gives you an actual flow diagram of all the data sets of data, which I think is a really cool way. If you're trying to get an understanding, some people find it hard to read JSON and understand the processes of it, but this is an easy way to explain it. Quite useful if we're doing anything in meetings or anything like that, where you're talking to a non-technical person, you're trying to explain how the data is coming in, how we're working with it. It's quite a good way of representing the data. So I think that's a cool little tool. The links at the bottom, all you do is just paste the sample code of your JSON into there and it creates a diagram for you, which I thought was quite neat. The other one was avoid multi-window record blocking. Now, this is a known issue that we suffer with, and some of it is because of bad build, and I will admit that we have bad build in our solutions. But I thought it was a really good article because it actually goes over all of the variants of what you can do. So you could use like an on-timer to correct the problem. So you could have it release the record or the window behind. We have a classic thing that we have with users that we allow them to have multiple windows open, but the problem is they were on multiple data sets. They could be on 3 windows of the same record and then they end up locking it themselves. So it's not necessarily just multiple users on a server being in the same record at the same time. It could be the same user on the server on the same machine in the same record at the same time. So that just happens. It's a byproduct of allowing people that access to do that. However, it's quite useful to understand methodologies and ways of preventing that, stopping it, and so forth. They go down, the article goes in deep dive into just use web viewers as a solution. It seems to work because web viewers don't really lock any records. It just renders the data forward. People mentioned custom menus, force a commit on a script edit. Basically with scripting, you could do it on, as I say, the timer release as well. But if you suffer this on a large solution, it's a useful read. So that should be quite good. Finally, this was a navigation for mouse overs. This is something that came up that it's something we've all been able to do in the past, but it was more of a modern take on how to do this. So if I just click this, it should give you an idea, and it gives you an idea to do this. So anyone's working in user interfaces and that wants to do something a bit neat and tidy and a bit more, I don't know, pizzazz in your solution and make it glow and make it shine. It was a clever way of doing it, and they literally go through various ways you can do this. You can do it with various things of sliding out with portals. You can even do port navigation. It shows you how it functions and how you do the mouse over to make that work. So that's quite good. But I thought it was a useful thing to have a look at. Again, this is all recorded. The links are there. You'll go back over the video if we don't catch it in time. I will post the links to these in the chat after I've done my little talk. So don't worry about writing anything down. They should be in the chat for you after. Another one was something that Wim did, which was a way of called TOG hopping. And the idea and the method behind this is, it's the scenario of if you're in one TOG and you want to find something, but then you want to go to another TOG, but you want to remember the find you had before and they're related or they're linked, you would lose your found sets if you navigate away. The idea of this is you can create a way of actually saving your TOG or saving your selection, and then you can revert it back with go to related records. It's a clever way of doing it. It's the classic thing that we've been doing various things before, where we would do snapshot links, saving them into a container field, and then you could then grab that container field and drop that container field back out to a desktop, open that result. There's all clever ways you can do it with record scripting, everything. We've all been there, all done it. But this is a way within a solution. If your solution's not massive and not too big and you just want to create sections, it's a clever way of grabbing that information. But the article goes through the whole thing. It's quite straightforward. The only thing is you require to duplicate some of your TOGs to enable you to do that. But if you've got shall we say, a layout for your navigation, and you could tie it to that TOG for navigation, therefore you could get to the records and come back. So I thought it was a neat little way of doing it. It's a recent post that's come up, so worth a read. And that is the end of the news. All of this will be discussed in more detail, I'm sure, in the virtual bar. I can have questions on it. As I say, look at the links that will be posted in the chat shortly, and you can have a good old read of those. And if you do read it throughout the evening session, we can have more of a discussion later on. So that's it. That's the news.
Thanks, Gary. Great news. I also have a little bit of news. I don't know if you can see my background, but there is a reason why that's there. So I'm just going to share my screen with you, and you'll see why. And I'm just going to keep quiet, and I'm going to skip a little bit of this video in a minute, just a little bit.
What do we look for? First of all, these are incredible people. You see some of the astronauts here in the room, and I know them pretty well now, and they really have talents that are quite incredible. I mean, they are unique, and I think I really can say that they are unique in many ways. Of course, you look for all the intellectual capability they have, all the manual capability that they can make quick decisions under pressure, usually, and make sure that they push the right buttons and not the wrong ones, and make sure that everything goes fine. But also, of course, we have gone through, I would say, a number of steps or tests and evaluation. We had about 6 big steps, big waves of reducing the 23, almost 23,000 of applications down to Space Agency. A few. We will see them coming up very soon. And there are, one of the last hurdles is the medical test, and the very last hurdle is the Director General Officer.
Was that fun?
Oh, that was so much fun, I tell you. Talking to these people and interviewing them.
Okay. There we go. Right.
Announce the third astronaut, though, for the career selection today, and that is Rosemary Coogan. Congratulations, Rosemary. Thank you very much. Yeah, would you like to follow in the same vein as the others and tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so my name's Rosemary Coogan. I'm 31 years old and I'm European, but from the UK. I spent a few years as a Royal Naval Reserve during my studies, and then went on to work briefly in industry for software and robotics companies before doing a PhD in astrophysics. And now I work with the French space agency CNES.
Oh, fantastic. And what do you look forward to doing the most in this position?
Oh, well, as Joseph said, the training will start next year, and already that's going to be a fantastic experience, the survival training, the language learning. And I think ESA has put together a really fantastic exploration program, as we've heard about at the ministerial. And I'm really just looking forward to contributing what I can to that program.
Okay.
You have to thank all these ministers for preparing the ground.
Yes, thank you very much.
I'm going to stop sharing. That is my daughter, our daughter, Rosemary. So I'm afraid I couldn't help but share that with you all. Right.
What was the odds? What was the odds? Yeah, what was the odds of someone becoming an astronaut? I think you spoke to me about it, Joyce. Was some stupid number, isn't it?
There were 22,500 applicants, and there were 5 selected.
Wow, it's impressive. So impressive. So
a
part of that, she will be hopefully going up.
She will. She's almost guaranteed to have a mission in a few years. Won't be for a few years, a couple of years of training, and then some mission-specific training. And under every normal circumstance, she will be going up to space, which is quite terrifying.
But absolutely amazing, totally amazing. So wonderful achievement. Well done.
Thank you. Yes, we're extraordinarily proud, and let's get on with the meeting before I get too embarrassed.
Yeah, pretty much as ready as I'm ever going to be. So, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show one of the talks that I gave in Malmo, and I'm going to basically talk about OpenAPI, the OpenAPI standard, and what it means for FileMaker developers. So for John and Chris and Heidi, I hope this doesn't bore you too much because I think you've already seen it. What I'm going to do is basically I'm going to skip over the couple of the more boring bits of the talk. I'll try to speed that part up and sort of focus a bit more on like what are the parts that are really relevant to us as FileMaker or Claris developers. So if I just share my screen. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Wait a minute. There you go. You should be able to do that now.
Yeah, cool. Great. Share. So if you can see my screen, I will just start off. Sorry. I'll actually just run through the same slide deck, but like I say, sort of skipping over some parts. It is definitely the same slide deck. So yeah, a lovely photo from Malmo. We actually walked down the beach where this photo was taken from. Really, really nice. So this is talking about the OpenAPI initiative and why should we care. I think most of you know me, but basically I'm Canadian. I've been in London, living in London for the last 20 odd years, working with FileMaker since version 3. Started transforming digital, and what I'm trying to do is trying to build a product that uses machine learning to extract insights from meetings. And I'm far too fond of German cars, as the photo shows. So what we're going to cover is basically a description of what is OpenAPI, why should you care, what can it do for you, how does this fit in with software tooling, and more specifically, how can it fit into the context of the Claris ecosystem. So start off, first off, why is a standard useful in the first place? So the OpenAPI is a standard for describing, well, software APIs. And the standard, in this case, can help developers understand things more quickly. It can result in higher quality code, firms such as someone like Twilio, who've got a large number of different APIs, it allows them to have better governance of the APIs, that they can ensure that the APIs are all done in a very similar fashion, so that they've got almost like a house style, if you will. So you don't end up with one API that works one way and another API from the same company that works in a completely different way, which would be really bad. The parts that are probably most useful to us as FileMaker developers are that it allows a test-driven approach to development and it enables software tooling. So the software tooling part is actually probably the most important part. And I'll get to that. So fundamentally, what it means is that software tooling, it can write code for you. So you're probably familiar with that to some extent. If you've connected to APIs using Postman, you've seen that Postman can tell you what curl code to use, or what PHP or Python or JavaScript code to use to talk to an API. And that's enabled by, it's made more easy by standards like OpenAPI. But the next part of it that's really cool is that it allows us to write code that allows us to test an API without talking to a live API server. So theoretically, we could, if we had the Twilio API standard API document, we should be able to write code that would talk to that API document without needing to talk to a Twilio live server, which while we're doing development is something that's quite risky. We don't want to be hitting a live server while we're trying to debug things. So you're all familiar with, I'm sure, an API is an application programming interface. It's the point of contact between two systems, and it's referring to the interface rather than the underlying code. And that's where the standard becomes useful. And it's usually these days a RESTful approach over HTTPS. So OpenAPI is a standard for describing APIs in a vendor-neutral way. So it's the same description or same standard across a variety of vendors. You may have heard of Swagger as well as OpenAPI, and OpenAPI developed out of Swagger. Swagger was an early attempt to build a standard for describing APIs. Swagger is still in use, still very popular. OpenAPI was kind of a development of that, and they use the same, fundamentally they're the same, but with some different semantics and some different, so the JSON documents are a little bit different, but the idea is basically the same. To describe the API as a JSON document. So it describes the specification, what operations are supported, what do those operations mean, what format does the data need to be in, and what's going to be returned. So it can be in either JSON or YAML. So YAML is YAML ain't markup, though it looks like it. And we're going to be focusing on JSON for reasons that you can probably guess. Okay, so I'm going to have a really quick run through the details of the specification, and I'm going to do this more quickly than I did in Malmo. So essentially what we've got is we've got a JSON document that has a root object that consists of sort of an OpenAPI, info, servers, paths, webhook, components, security, and so forth. So we'll just run through a few of them because not all of those are important to what I'm going to be talking about here. So OpenAPI is kind of something that's required. Basically, this is the version number of the OpenAPI specification. It's not the same as the version number of the API. We've got an info element, which consists of a title. A title is the only required element here, but we can have a summary, a description, the terms of service, contact information, license information, and then we've got also potentially a version number, which would be the version number of the API. We can have a list, potentially a list of servers, So I think the US, most of them don't seem to have these elements, but the US Patent Office does list the servers that are valid that you can speak to. Then we've got paths, which basically you can see here that in this case, what I've done is I'm using, there's kind of a standard demo specification called Pet Store that was originally done for Swagger that OpenAPI has implemented as well. So in this case, you can see we've got the path. The path is sort of /pets. It supports the get method. It has a description, and it also describes what responses it can return. And then a bit more information, basically saying, application/JSON, and then it can also point to a schema, which describes what are the inputs required for this. Components, we've got a variety of different things here. You can see I've just mentioned schemas. It can also describe what responses are provided, what parameters. The interesting thing is it can also provide examples. So if you're building a document like this, you can, and someone's developing to an API, you can provide examples for developers to use. Headers, security schemes. I'll touch a bit more on security schemes later because security schemes is one of the areas where I ran into some issues. And then basically the schemas describe the input and output types. So in this case, you can see that we've got a category. The second item down, a category is an object. It's got two properties, an ID, which is an integer and describes the format, and a name. Now, the other thing is when we're talking about the ability to test the API, that when you're testing the API with some of the software tooling that I'll show you in a moment, it reads those, it can read the schema and it can generate sample data of its own without the developers of the API needing to provide sample data. It's going to be essentially random data, but it's going to conform to the standard, and that's going to be enough to actually test against. It describes what responses you can expect. So in this case, we know that we're going to get either a 200 response, which is a pet that's returned, or an unexpected error. And those are the only two responses that this particular path on the API will provide. And then we've got parameters. What do we need to pass in to this to actually make it work? And then we've got security schemas. And in this case, the pet store auth, you can see it saying we've got two types. We've got OAuth2, and we've also got an API key approach. And I'll touch on this again in a bit. So that's the really boring bit. So one of the cool things is that basically an API server that supports the OpenAPI standard can be self-documenting. So if I click on this, this is something I wrote in. I don't actually have my full sample API that I wrote for Malmo because I did that on my notebook and I forgot to transfer that Python project across. So you're just getting a very, very simple one that's just got a couple of methods. But you can see here, you can see that it supports a get method and it tells you the information. You can try it out if you want to, if you execute. Shows you the curl code, what the request URL was, the response body, and the other information. So the interesting thing here is that I didn't write any code to do this. In Python, I'm using a project called FastAPI, and FastAPI generated all of that for me. I just wrote the methods to handle, to essentially return a Python object that said, with a message saying hello world, so Python dictionary. So that I thought was really, really cool. So the part that you're going to find most interesting, I think, is mocking a server. So this basically is a solution for a really, really annoying problem in developing API connections that until I heard about mocking servers, I basically constantly would run up against. let's say I'm writing code in FileMaker or Python or JavaScript or whatever, and I want to talk to an API. If the API provider does not provide a sandbox, then I've got the question of how do I test my code? I don't really want to test my code as I'm developing against a live API. So the solution, if the API provides OpenAPI support or Swagger support, is that you can run a mock server. So a mock server is a fake server that basically emulates the real server. And what it does is it loads the API specification document for the API and runs a web server. You can then talk to that web server. So you can write. Now, so this works in two ways. If you're a consumer of an API, it allows you to test your API consuming code without touching a live API. But if you're writing kind of an API yourself that's producing the API, you can write your API standard, your API, the document that describes what the API does before you write the API code. So what it means is you can actually have people, working on the development of the API, that the providers and the consumers working separately at the same time. And the mock server can generate random sample data, which is kind of cool. So what I've done is I've used one called Prism, and it's a node module. So basically it's actually this is not quite, it'd be sudo npm install stoplight/prism CLI, or you've also got the Docker option. So that's pretty cool. I will show you this in a second. This is what it looks like when it's running. In this case, you can see that it's a command line tool. So basically what I've said is I've basically said Prism mock, then I've used the name petstore.oas.json. That's the API document. And then it basically is, you can see that it's now listening on port 4010. And that's what it supports, all those methods and those paths. So it can generate sample data. So if you use the dynamic option, it will dynamically generate examples. And okay, so what I'll do is I'll just actually, so 1 second. Ah, there we are. Sorry, I was trying to get my mouse back so I can. Okay, so if I start here, so I'm in the right path, just a second. So if I say on my command line, if I say Prism, so what I've got here is, actually, if I just, no, I'll just actually just run that. So Prism mock petstore.oas.json. Take a second, and you can see that's now running. So Prism is listening localhost port 4010. And what I can do is I can connect to it using curl, or in my case, I'm using something called HTTP. So if I just do issue a get command, the reason I've used HTTP is that actually it's much easier to read on a command line compared to a curl. It basically separates things out quite nicely. So you can see in this case that it's you can see it's returned, it's found compatible content, passed the validation rules, and it's responded with 200, and there's my data. Okay, now the other thing I mentioned about authentication, because the document here that I'm using mentions authentication in the document. The mock server is also going to apply authentication. So if I remove that and just do you can see that in this case, it did not pass the validation rules, and it terminated with an error. And you can see here that it's basically told me that my request does not meet the security requirements. Okay, this is the part that when I was testing, originally playing around with it, I found initially quite a little bit difficult to get around. But in the end, what I found was that essentially what you do is, in this case, just basically pass in a bearer a/bearer a/token, and then it works correctly. So you can see the data that's returning is pretty basic, but the thing is that is enough to actually test an API. So if I ran this again, and sorry, I just need to double check what my so it was /d/p. So if I run that again, this time say d/p, and if I say 4020, so that's running on port 4020. I copy that. HTTP. Actually, I'll just /bearer token. So in this case, what I've got is basically I've got just a load of sample data that it's made up. I'm not sure how you control the amount of sample data, but oh, that's returned XML this time. Interesting. Okay, that was interesting. Anyway, so you can essentially what you can see is that this enables us to test an API without talking to the live server, which is really, really cool. So the HTTP, essentially we can, if I just play that again, is basically simply, it's on the Mac, it's just a brew install HTTP, and that gets you that. Postman, basically, if you import an OpenAPI document, Postman will basically give you the curl code. It'll find all the methods that are associated with it. And then the other thing is, of course, FileMaker works with JSON. So what I'm showing you next is just it's a very early proof of concept. And basically what this does, I'm not running this server live, but essentially what I've done is I've imported an OpenAPI document. The JSON for that looks like this. So I've got all my info. I'm not supporting any servers, but under paths, you can see what paths it supports, and also what methods and the parameters. So I'm not running the API at the moment, so I can't actually try it out. But essentially, the proof of concept part, what we're doing at this stage is it will generate the curl commands in FileMaker necessary to talk to the server and issue them. So that's very early stages, and we may basically that's probably going to be converted into an add-on as it gets a bit more fully developed. So, and I think, yeah, so basically what we're doing is we're importing the OpenAPI file, parse it, call the API endpoints, and then it retrieves the results without actually specifically coding for them. So for the developers, basically, it allows you to develop debug API code without talking to a live server. It also allows you to apply test-driven development. And the software tooling thing can help with generating example code. Developers can learn an API more quickly, can build more consistent APIs, and you get improved governance from the side of the point of view of the API providers. And yeah, so really that's the two main points are that we can develop against a mock server and we can generate code programmatically. And so that basically is about it. So has anyone got any questions?
I like the idea of the mock server. Nice work. The amount of times you don't want to hit a main live server, and you're forced to sometimes because it's the only one that exists. So
yeah, actually, one thing I did forget to mention is that if I can find it, FileMaker's data API supports the OpenAPI specification. Actually, if I just oh, sorry, hold on, it's going to be, yeah, Visual Studio Code will be quicker to open. Oh, and of course I just updated that, so sorry.
It'll open, that'd be quick.
Ian, you said the FileMaker data API supports the OpenAPI specification?
Yeah.
Does that mean that, and you earlier in your presentation, you used the phrase self-documenting. Does that, and I see here what looks, sorry.
Okay, actually, okay, when I said self-document, I probably should have been a little more clear. That depends on what libraries people are using on the API side. So in my Python coding, the library that I've used will automatically, it will basically look through my Python code. It'll recognize what methods I'm exposing and what paths I'm exposing, and it will automatically generate documentation for those.
Okay, that makes sense to me. A question for clarification from my understanding is, yeah, the document that you have up on the screen looks to me to be a JSON, therefore structured representation of an API in the sense that it would encapsulate documentation of endpoints, expected inputs, and perhaps expected outputs. Is this a document that we would expect to be produced by the team that is producing the API?
Yes. Yes, okay. that would generally be, well, actually that would virtually always be the case.
Okay, so it would be a more structured representation of the AMI of the API than we would typically find in the form of a collection of web pages.
Yes, yes, it is. Now, the one thing I will say about this one is that it looks like they've put in the logo as a base64 object. And whenever I've tried to parse this document, that base64 object seems to cause loads of issues. So what I've generally done is I've downloaded this, I've deleted the logo, and then I've been able to parse the document successfully. Now, the other point on here is that they've got that for the data API. They don't have that for the server admin API. But in Malmo, I was chatting to Romain from One More Thing, and he told me that basically they're using exactly the same technology for both APIs. And he said he was able to find the document, but it took a lot of digging around, and I've not been able to find where a similar document is for the server admin API. which is unfortunate because the server admin API is the one that I'm less familiar with, so would actually want the information on.
Just to follow, if I may, very, very cool. Number one, especially as you pointed out and highlighted the mock server portion of the capability that's made available through this. I
think that's the key thing, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to riff off something that you said in terms of the code generation. And I think my understanding of what you said is you're generating kind of the curl aspects of it. One thing that I think is worth mentioning is Beverly Voth, Oliver Reed, and a number of other people, myself included, have done some work in terms of taking JSON structures and as input and code-generating FileMaker code calculations and/or script steps. And,
okay, yeah, I think I did sit through. I did see one of Oliver's presentations in Malmo, where he talked about things like that. Yes.
So, and that, you know, and if you put it all together, because I think our collective objective here is to write all of us here, I'd imagine, are trying to write high quality code and also to write it rapidly, you know, to deliver return on investment to customers and broaden the platform. I'm going to drop my modest contribution, which was a presentation to the LA group that you might and others might find useful, where I took a stab at code generating calcs and script steps from JSON input, both, and that would be relevant to building the package and also parsing the result. But anyway, that code that I'm going to drop can be improved on. But anyway, thanks for the presentation. I think it's really interesting.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else got any questions for Ian on that?
I thought it was fascinating, Ian. I just have to say that it's now when you said we all need somewhere to test that stuff out without being able to without having to hit the real live server. Absolutely, I've come across that before now. So yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, so I'll just go to that page on the keynote presentation just so you can, so it's on screen. Where did I? There. Yeah, so the one I used was called Prism. Postman can also mock a server. It has that, Postman absolutely has that capability, but you need to have an account, and it looks like you need to use their web service to do it. Okay. Whereas Prism can run locally on a computer that you've got.
Something that we're doing is, obviously I've got a web team that does their own stuff, and the advantage is they're my team, so I get a lot of documentation. I've got one-to-one with the developers who are writing that API, so they've got their own web API that we use, and we hit FileMaker towards that. But it's live, so I'm instantly drawn to this now. I'm going to talk to Penny and Ben in the office and say, right, okay, if there's a way you could download the entire of their API, push it through something else, we can just hit it as much as we want. It doesn't make a difference. At least it'll come back with a response. So.
Yeah,
that is key. That is key, because we have to.
That is the key. That it's going to give you a well-formed response that you'll be able to write code against.
Perfect.
Yeah. So the two main options there are, I believe, are Swagger and OpenAPI, which are very similar. So I mean, your web team probably is already familiar to some extent with them and may have a preference one way or the other, but fundamentally, the way they work is pretty similar.
I'll give this test one. Brilliant. Nice one, Ian.
Okay.
Superb. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much.
So I think that sounds like it's about it for the questions for that one, unless anyone else has got some other questions. No. If you need to go over it again, which I think I probably will, do look at the video on YouTube when we get it up there, which Gary will do no doubt in no time at all, because he's very good at that sort of thing.
I believe the Malmo version is also
it's up there, is it?
Probably already up.
Yeah, so another place to look for it as well. Thanks very much, Ian. That's brilliant. It's got us started really well. We'll move on to the next one if we're ready. John, are you ready?
Yes, if I turn my microphone on.
Does help. Over to you, John.
Let's go with that. So can you all see that?
Yep.
Is the question. Cool. So equally like like Ian, this is a reprise of a presentation I did in Malmo. And it was always in my head when I did a presentation, obviously, as part of Auto Enter, which for people was a proper 35 minutes blast through. This is what OData is about for those who hadn't played with it or who haven't been to this group and heard me endlessly bleat on about OData. So the link is there. Obviously, I also did a context podcast talking to Todd and Martha about OData, but this was designed to kind of go, that's what you need to know to get started with OData. At some point, what I could do with doing is something a bit deeper and a bit more complex. So this is effectively the first step in that direction. So therefore, we don't need to cover what OData is about. Obviously, just a quick reminder, the big thing around this is to do with authentication, but you do need the latest versions to be able to work with. So the first thing is to look at the whole issue of the fact that anything where you talk to the server and get some data back is now metered, shall we say. So each user has a 2 GB year data allowance. Data into the server costs you nothing, but the data out, you are effectively paying at some point. And if you get that wrong, I think there was a post on the community just recently about somebody whose web developer had managed to, every time the web page refreshed, they downloaded basically the whole database to cache locally, and they had burned through their data allowance in less than 2 weeks. That's only through doing some really bad practice. But still, because we know it's metered, one of the first things is to go, okay, so what about managing that, because it costs you? So when you create a record using OData, so you pass it a JSON payload with all of the fields and the field data. When you create a record, you actually get the whole record back. So my first question is, well, did you stop that then? Is there a way to stop it? And what if the data that you're passing is in fact massive, because it includes some base64 files? You really don't want to get everything back just because you've created something. So line 3, we have a really fantastic header that we can put into the request, which is the prefer header, and using return is minimal. So that basically says, when I give you something, just don't give me anything back that I don't need. In fact, mostly just don't give me anything back. But obviously, as a result, now we don't know if what we did was successful. There are two places that we get back a response. So if you're using Postman to do your testing, or I'll show you in a minute, if you're grabbing the headers, we're going to get a HTTP code 204, which means it was successful, but there's no content to give you. That's correct, because that's what I just asked you for. If you're running that in a FileMaker script, you will get an error 10 after the insert from URL, which is a data is missing. Again, correct. I asked you not to give me any data, but FileMaker sees that as an error. So you do need to trap for both of those things, because that will give you the idea that it was successful, but you've just got no data. What if you want to reference, however, the record that you've just created? So something I'm in the habit of, and I suggest you get in the habit of, is an additional, in the headers, dump whatever you get back in the headers into a global variable so that you get access to it. Global variable, just so you can also see it in the data viewer, as opposed to just in the script. And in the headers, you're going to get back, if the prefer return minimal is on, when you do a post, inside the headers, you will also get back an additional header called row ID. The row ID is FileMaker's internal ID. So that number there will be whatever you get from get record ID. So it's what FileMaker is using internally. So you do get access to something that IDs the record that you've just created if you turn that off. All the examples, there's a squiggle, which obviously is that's the first part we need to just keep in our minds. We need to pass the server and the file name, and then everything else is happening after that for the URL. So if you create a record and get back the row ID, you can literally just say, in that table there, give me back record number 24, which was the one I just created. That works if you have no fields in your table that are set up as key fields or that OData can see as a key field. And that's not just about the fact whether it's kind of got a unique ID calculation. It's also that it's set up to be validation is unique. And I think there's one other thing. Because if you have a field that's a key field that OData sees as a key field, and you try to pass it this number, record ID number, you will then get incompatible data types. And the reason is normally key is not in fact a number, or in fact, even if it is a number, you still get back incompatible data types if you have a field that's a key. Or you might also get, as I had in Postman, you might get back a 404 error saying, yeah, I can't find that. I really don't know what it is. So I went through a loop of, oh, okay, maybe what I need to do is I need to wrap that in single quote marks because it's a piece of data. No, also got 404 error with that. And it's to do with whether or not there is already a key field. But what you can do is you can do a query which says, I have a field called grid, which I put in all my tables, which is an auto-enter calc for get record ID. So what I was doing was saying, okay, well, I can filter the data that I've got where I want to find the record where that field is equal to 24. And could you give me back, please, the unique ID of that record? So when I make the post to create the record, I can get back the row ID. I can use that row ID then to say, could you just give me the unique ID of that record I just created? Which then means you can use it in something else. And what you have done effectively is literally just get back the data that you're really interested in, not all of the record. Just as a note, when you do a patch, which is effectively updating a record, you get back in the headers another header, which is fmodata.affected_rows. Now, clearly, if you're patching a single record, then the answer to that should be 1, because you are doing that. But it's really helpful if you run a batch, because if you allow it to continue on error, then you can see how many rows got affected by the data you were writing, and is that the same number as the number of rows that I put in a batch. So again, most of these things are here just to help you speed up your learning, and then you can go and play with them. A really useful thing, maybe, if you haven't already got one, is creating a custom function to parse the headers to find out what the response really was. So this just looks for the HTTP/string within the headers. Now, if you get back some headers and the first value is 100, which means continue, or a 203, the header you're really after is in fact not the first one, but the last one in the list. So what this custom function does is just go, if HTTP occurs more than once, grab the last one, not the first one, because the answer I'm really interested in is, was it successful, not was I told to continue. That's my version. Steal it or write your own, but very helpful. And a really quick aside, is to do with something that is just around the corner that hopefully Doug is going to tell us all about and when it's coming. There's something brand new in 19.6 around a new get error location step, which returns three lines which contain the file name, the script name, and the line number in the script where an error occurs. But again, you do need to write a little custom function to do this, because if you say, this has happened, get me the last error, and there is an error, and then you say, get me the last error location, then it won't tell you where the error was, because the get last error clears the get last error because it was successful. So you have to do both at the same time. There's just a little kind of teaser for you. But it's really helpful because you now get back the script line where an error might occur. Obviously, if you're then in the habit of developing, that script line number may be changing every single time you run the script because you're modifying it. So that may or may not be as useful as you think, but at least you can get that back now. So how to extend our searches in OData? I really did skip over this in the auto enter. So just a reminder that everything that we're doing goes into the URL, okay, here. So we have some kind of URL followed by something that is a query as the second part of the URL. So therefore, anything that's an action word is prefaced with a $sign to differentiate it from being a field name or something else. So words like filter and select all have a $, in front of them whenever you see them, if it's an action. The two exceptions to that are a cross join and a batch. They are a command and they go before the query. All the other things are things that are modifying the query, so come after the question mark. A couple of things that will really help you if you're not in the habit of reading the manual, as apparently some developers are. Anything that's got special characters in a field name, which not only includes spaces and kind of weird ASCII characters, but oddly includes underscore. So all of those who've kind of got their own in-house style, which includes underscores in field names, to use those in OData, those need to be encased in double quotation marks to be seen as valid. Otherwise, it just won't work. Obviously, everything to do with date and time is ISO 8601, which is YYYYMMDD. And offsets are related to the server. Now, interestingly, I have been able to demonstrate that I can, in fact, do a query where I can send the dates in UK format. If I get time, I may just show you that as well. But the other interesting one is the $count. So you can get back a count of the number of records that match your query. That is the count before you have used either top or skip to reduce the number. So count is how many records match this query. So that's the portal view of this. If you use top and skip, that's the filtered portal version of this thing, where you only want to see like the most recent, or you just want to see 5. Count ignores those other criteria. But there's a potential that if you're not doing something to deliberately reduce the number of records you get back, it means you don't have to have a custom function that says, what's the size of this array on the way back? You've already got the answer. And this is where, because there is a period or dot in the JSON key name, you have to use the new ability or more recent ability to be able to query the JSON element using that format at the bottom. So the key name that has a dot in it has to be surrounded in single speech marks, which has to be surrounded in square brackets before it goes into the double speech mark brackets. But that get element will get you the OData count from the payload, again, just to help you speed up your development. So a cross join, very interesting, is our ability, like we can with execute SQL, to create the relationships between data in the query that we're writing, not on the relationship graph. So we can find any piece of data that's related to some other piece of data by building our query as we go along to find some records. You can't use that query to then have a found set that you can update to. This is only about returning data, but it does allow you to pull data from completely disparate tables and build a relationship on the fly. So how it works is you say, hey, I want to cross join between this table and that table. So the cross join, as I said, comes after the slash, after the file name. And then we build the filter. So what I'm going to walk through, and it kind of works backwards here. So what I'd like to find is something where in this table, the unique ID relates to some parent ID foreign key in that table over there, and where in this table, the surname, in this case, is my surname. So I can build a relationship that says, okay, I've got a table over there that's related to this one, on the basis that we're starting on this record here. What I then want to do is to expand the answer to give me back from the first table, could you give me back this field and this field? And then from the second table, could you give me back that field and that field, please? So that's just the syntax which relates to, like I say, to an execute SQL kind of query. And obviously what you then get back is just the data that you've asked for, which obviously I think mostly we'd be doing to pass into some kind of JavaScripty display widget when we've got an array of values. Let's just see that. Clearly the issue is because OData is a standard, you're going to get back the answer in the way that OData, anybody else who's consuming this OData would expect to get it back. So there's a certain amount of fluff around the actual data. So you can see at the bottom there, those are potentially the 4 fields that I asked for, 2 of which come from this table, 2 from another table. But there's a lot of other kind of fluff. You can also see in this particular case, I might have got 7 answers back. So one of the next things was, okay, well, how might you want to just get to those core pieces of data? On Kevin Frank's FileMaker Hacks, there was a great article with a demo file, which assuming we have a tiny bit of time, I'll just show you the file, about a thing called JSONator, which is a JavaScript library that enables you to create XPath type queries into the JSON data to just get back the pieces of data that you're after. And for anybody who's really interested, JSONator is what is the query language that's built into Node-RED. So if you're already using Node-RED to do some querying on a JSON object, then you've already used JSONator language. There are other libraries available as well. There are clearly lots of other possibilities from that big block of JSON, about how to just extract the pieces of data. It's not that this is the only or the best way. Clearly, using a card window and looping through things using list ofs. It may be that that's not even the right way to do it. Maybe using execute data API is the right way to get your data back. That only obviously works within this file in this table. And if you have data that's in a portal, that may be much more complicated to unpack. Clearly, execute SQL is also still there as a friend. So a quick real world example of where I've one of the things I've gone with using OData. This was I made an architectural decision about a project that I've been working on. It's in student data, and the student data in the UK that we have to return to the government is mandated to be in XML. There are potentially a number of good reasons. There are some really bad reasons as well, but the data's in XML. But to allow the users to be able to see, most people who've done this do it using XSLTs. So you've got all the data in FileMaker, and then when you want to generate the XML, you do a big export through an XSLT, and then there you go, there's the XML. But what it doesn't allow you to do is to view what is likely to be the XML at this point in the tree. So I made the decision that what I'd do is I'd create the XML as a calculated field locally. But what I didn't want to do was to blight the database with lots of unstored calculations, because as you know, they're the work of the devil and they'll slow your system down in ways that we really don't like. So you need to be able to effectively kick any children or grandchildren records to make them refresh up the tree. So that's the cost of having made that architectural decisions. But using OData, I know what set of records I might need to be able to kind of go off and talk to. So there's a couple of things I discovered in there that may help you. So I had a field that's a multi-selection checkbox field. Therefore, as far as the data is concerned, it's 3 values separated by a carriage return, \r. Obviously, if we do that in execute SQL, we've got to wrap that in %signs. The way of doing that in OData is I can say, I'd like the records here where the return ID contains that value. So 22056 is contained inside that other string, which is the text string version of the checkbox. The other thing was about how it regards values that are empty. So in this case, I've got a query that says, okay, I'd like some records where there's a typo in there, which I've only just seen, where the end date is less than the 12th of November, or where it's empty. So in either of those cases, I'd like the answer back, and if the start date is also after the 31st of July. Again, hopefully that's just a little query that may spur you to play around with things. So obviously, one way of doing this particular task would have been, and I think I might have done it in a previous iteration, is to use perform script on server. Go off and kind of do all of this thing. Here's some things you might need. Go off and run it as perform script on server. So the way it's done technically is I just have a field in each of the tables which is related, which when you update it, it updates the modification timestamp. The modification timestamp is referenced in the XML calculation. It's just a kind of text thing. So I just have all I need to do is to reset. It's the equivalent of doing a replace field contents. You could run it as perform script on server, but we all know that perform script on server starts a whole new client session. It runs it on OpenScript. You need layout context to be able to do all of this. Whereas by saying, hey, could you just go and find this set of records and update them, please? So it's the query is based on a patch. Just make this field into a 1, even though it was a 1 to start with. That's enough to trigger the XML to refresh. And obviously the reason for using PSOS as well is, well, you don't have to bring all the records down locally to be able to process them. So OData will give you the same benefit there. So as well as kind of simple things like, okay, if you just not returning back any data when you're creating a record. There are some other ways that we can control how much data is being passed around. And one of them is the fact that using OData, we can run a script at the other end. So it references this special pseudo table called script. So we use script dot and then the script name, but we can pass parameters to that script as well. You have to pass the JSON object with that object in it, script parameter value, but anything we pass in the middle of there gets passed to the script that you're calling. And that at the receiving end in the script is just gathered from the regular get script parameter. So on doing this, have absolutely discovered that when you run a script using OData, it does run the on first window open script. So therefore, if you're in the habit of testing for whether this is running on a server by server version, then you also need to test for does the account privilege set that you're running it with have the OData turned on, and preferably don't run the on first window open script unless you really want to. It also means that any errors that occur in that script are logged in the event log. So the actual call is logged in the odata.log, but any errors are logged in the event log, just in the way that a PSOS script would also be. The reason why is clearly that a script needs a context in which to run, because you may be going to some layout to do something. It's not purely it's not pure data. You may be using layouts. But obviously, when the script has run, so I don't know about you, but one of the things I particularly hate about other developers' code is when they're basically too lazy to finish their script with an exit script step. Okay, I will put that out there. I could kill people for doing that. One of the reasons is you can put a kind of breakpoint on it, which means that you can see what all the variables were before you've finished the script and you haven't lost them forever. But in my case, it's about the fact that you are then completely in control of what's being returned through that exit script step. Doesn't matter what it is, pick any kind of structure, stick to it for your own internal purposes. But what you put into the exit script step, you will get back as the answer to the OData call to run a script. In this particular format, you'll get back the script result object. The code, if it's run successfully, will be 0, but then you'll get result parameter, and whatever it is that you decided to put in the exit step, you'll get back. I've just chosen something that looks vaguely like JSON, but actually isn't, as an example. So we're about to put all of those together. Those who followed the modular programming journey, what was the aim of modular programming? Well, it's about writing our code once, maintaining it in one place. Once you've solved the problem, being able to use it over and over again, either within the same system or preferably for somebody else where you can charge them lots of money for having already solved the problem once. Or at the very least, you can get a fast start on a project by being able to lift something straight out and put it in somewhere else. And while you're testing and developing, being able to host this on a completely different server for all kinds of reasons, either while you're doing maintenance on a server, short-term or long-term. And obviously, card windows gave us a great opportunity when they first came along for doing things like having a modular approach, particularly with interface type things, pickers, searching, that kind of stuff. But the question I've always been interested in is what happens if this kind of other file, which I'm personally calling a machine file, what happens if it needs to do calculation or operate on some other file while it's doing it? Well, at the start of our journey, clearly, we used to have a hard-coded external data source to another file for us to be able to reference that file. We can run a script in another file if we have a link to it. the thing that we then have to manage is everything around permissions, not getting to the point where somebody then suddenly has to log into another file. And obviously, if you do that multiple times, that's one of the reasons why the last talk I did, which is around just using multiple files, it's one of the negatives because it's something you have to manage. Obviously, around version 16.17, we got the opportunity for that external data source to be a $double variable. So it can be programmatic. You can set it in a script. It adds a bit of complexity if you've forgotten to run the script and you want to go and edit something or use Developer Assistant to do a search, because it'll go, I can't find a file. And you can only modify that link by closing and reopening the file. You can absolutely reset it to a different value, but only by closing and reopening. So it's not dynamic in any kind of way. So clearly, my question, so what do we get from our new API methods? So we're not doing DAPI because there's lots of tokens to manage and it's 3 times as many calls. But we can both create a record and run a script with a payload and choose what we get back by running a script in OData. And everything about those things are the file name, the server location, the script that we're running, the data that we're passing, everything about there is programmatic, whether that's in a script where we're passing the values or we're taking the values from fields in tables. Everything about this can be completely dynamic. And please, let's not forget again, it's basic authentication. So it's really very simple. So let's see how far we might have got. I did write, I was quite surprised it was that long ago, 2017, 2 articles I wrote, which are on LinkedIn, around my kind of explorations with kind of making all of this work using hard-coded references and external references, and explains kind of how I'd done some stuff. I went to a pause on error, sat with Jason Young, and we kind of came up with a really interesting way of doing it that absolutely works. So stepping back and saying, okay, could that be applied using OData? So here's the simplest of conceptual models. I'm working in file A. I've got another file, which is this file over here. Can I do something in that file and get the answer back from it? So clearly, that's not just can I create a record, but can I actually do an action and return a result? So the first thing is, clearly with OData, we have no link at all from file A to this machine file. It's totally separate in time and space. The machine file can be on a completely different server on another side of the world if I really, really want to. And obviously, as I've already indicated, if our exit script step is behaving well, we will get an answer back from asking you to run a script over there. The advantage is that once I have that working in this file, I can apply that in any number of files, whether that's other files in this system or other files from different clients. This is kind of, in that sense, modular. I've created something that works, ask it to do something, get a result back, do that from there, do that from there. What if in a more complex way, though, what I'd like, so this version of it is a kind of, I don't know, maybe it's a microservice-y thing where you're asking it to do some complicated calculation or something like that. What if what I'm asking this thing to do in the middle to do is to operate on a completely separate file, if you don't mind? So I'm going to send you some instructions, and the instructions are, could you just go and do something in that file over there, please? So using this methodology, you've got no link from where you started to the machine file in the middle. That file itself doesn't have to have a link to this other file as well. And obviously, you're going to run a script in file B. You're going to get an answer back because you've written it. You're going to get an answer back. And you can use this machine to then say, okay, I ran the script over there. Here's the result I got back. there you go. You can have the result back that I got from over there. Okay. There's also, if you went into file B, that you don't have to have any kind of link to file A. It doesn't need to know where the data that it got sent was sent from, unless you explicitly tell it. There is no kind of link. So those three files genuinely could be completely independent, but in fact operate on each other. Now, clearly, that can be extended at the front end. Once you've got this working, it can be run from multiple places, but it doesn't have to limit itself to just operating in one file at the end. That could be 2, 3, 4, as many files as you like. So as long as you're passing enough of a complex object into the middle that says, do this, please, then do this in that file over there, followed by, could you just do this in that file over there while you're there? And along the way, can I collect all the answers and give you back all of the answers, results of the actions that you asked me to take? So the kind of things that could be doing is in the middle is OAuth kind of things, talking to things like Google, AWS, Azure that need your OAuth credentials, stuff like sending Microsoft Graph API messages and emails, because we're beginning to move away from SMTP emails. So you have a single place in your system where if I pass you the right amount of information, you'll send an email for me. Thank you very much. I'm using it in one particular case with a Teams with the Graph API to generate a Teams ID for an individual user, and then generate a one-to-one chat with them. One of the advantages of doing this is that this machine file in the middle, which does in fact, do your OData, your OAuth stuff, only needs a full access username and password so that you can get into it and modify it as appropriate, and only a single user account which has the OData privileges turned on and nothing else turned on. So never going to say, oh, it's 100% secure. But what you've done is reduce the level at which nobody else can see your OAuth credentials, because they'd need your full access password. And even if they could find out what your OData account name was, the only thing you can do with that is kind of run a script, because you won't let it talk with FileMaker, certainly. So there's a level at which you've hidden some stuff away, and you don't have to bother about the fact that you've got user accounts which are changing every 5 seconds, which you need to set up in this file in the middle. And then those other files at the end are where you potentially might want to separate out some of the functional tasks after you've done the thing you've asked it to do. So if you're using it for communications, this could be sending an email or sending an SMS, sending some other notification on the basis of the thing I first asked you to do, and logging that. Logging is also a good reason for doing this. So I send you this request. Here's the result of what happened, and I'm now just like to log that somewhere. Potentially one of the reasons I discussed last time for having the logging in a separate file is the times when there are a couple of people at the top of the company who just want to see all of this kind of information, but actually all you need to do is give them access to the log, not the rest of the system where things are happening. You can go, there's a log file over there. If you want to see what happened, here's what happened. You can do your own searches. And obviously some of the newer things like doing pub/sub, where you kind of create a record that then has a script just running like a robot worker, which just says, hey, I've done this, create a record. Now, at some point later, you'll go along, because obviously doing it this way, it is synchronous. What pub/sub does is allow us to add an asynchronous part within there, so that once you've created a record, later on, you can act on that record. And a real world use case for this, for me spending the time and energy seeing if it does work, is around user account management. So for those who are big enough and clever enough and have the resources to do it, then obviously the space of saying, well, the world is moving to AD, OD, external auth, but not everybody has the skills and resources to do that and manage that. And you might set it up, but then you're not there in 2 years' time, and somebody's left with something that they don't know how to kind of modify and update. But obviously the principle of user management is to then put that in the hands of the people that it should be in, like the IT and the HR departments, not everybody else. Everybody else is a user in the file, by having to give them special kind of secret handshakes to be able to get into the right kind of space. And if you are using multiple files for various reasons, then you're going to want to be able to do this, an action of managing users in multiple files, potentially simultaneously. Obviously, FileMaker Claris has given us the set of native script steps to be able to create accounts, turn accounts on and off, change the passwords, and as I'll show you in a moment, there's an opportunity to be able to have a unique, potentially, if you've got multiple files, so you've got a person who can have a different privilege set and a different password in each of those files. Again, there may be a really good reason for that, is that in one file they're allowed to do this, in this other file they're not, they're allowed to only do this. And the big question would be, apart from it's just John having a bit of a tangent about OData and seeing how far we can go, there's a why question here, which is also key, and it's around testing while you're building. The ability to be able to say, I've got this user and I need to quickly switch them from this privilege set to this privilege set, and quickly change the password so that I can test that all of the stuff that I'm doing to manage my users does actually work. The big thing being that all of that control can be with IT. So if file A is your user's file, which sits on the IT person's desk and they sit next to HR, they've got control of it all. That's where it should be. Nobody else even needs to know that file exists even, but I can operate on my system files using this methodology. All I need to do when I'm passing a payload to this machine, all of the three things from the URL that I put up earlier, I just need to know where it is, which file you're interested in me working on, and in that file, what script you want me to run. And additionally, could you just please send me the data that you need to this script that's going to dispatch everything? And that would be, what action do you want me to run with what data? So the kind of payload might look something like that. I'm going to send it an add action with this status for this account name, with this password, with this privilege set on this server with this file name. Those are the kind of pieces of information. And clearly that's just a single version. That can be an array of multiple things, and I work through them one at a time. So I'm going to suggest that we could have a look at whether or not it really works. So let me just go to there. So first of all, before we get into that, this is the JSON demo file. Not to do a demo of it, but just to make you go and download it, and then there's a whole kind of this is what it does. There's a series of examples about how to write some of those queries. This last one here. So the query that I did before, that was a cross join, that it gave me back kind of lots of fluff and 4 pieces of data, but there are indeed 7 of them. If I just want to extract those pieces of data, this is potentially how to, let me copy that so I can do this and just say what I'd like back is values dot that. And so that should just give me back, maybe not. Put that back for a second. Oh, value, sorry, my mistake.
It was value, like singular, not plural.
Yeah, it was me typing. So from the value, there you go, get back all of the first names in all of the values. Now, clearly, so it's using a JavaScript library. So what you're seeing is a little tiny web viewer that's doing the processing, but that's a way of quickly getting back the data. Because you're in control of the query to the answer that you asked for, you can make that look like however you want to make it look. So if you're in the habit of doing virtual list and using a vertical pipe to be able to separate things, let's just do that. So here we go. We've just turned the data that we've got back into what you need to run a virtual list. Comes back as an array. That's just to, it works, it absolutely works. You can either get it back as an answer into a field, or the script is there to be able to copy to get it back into a script and for you to do something with it. I've been using it live for a couple of months on one project, and it's really very helpful to be able to process effectively. I'm importing Excel, converting Excel into JSON, and then saying inside that I know what's in here. Can I just grab the pieces that I'm really interested in? So that's a demo file for you to play with. Go off and download it. Read the article on Kevin's website. So let's get rid of that. So here we have. I've had my MacBook repaired just recently, and the trackpad seems to be really sticky for reasons which I don't fully understand. So it's moving windows around. And this file on the left is our file A, and I will just demonstrate first of all. That's the wrong thing. That it has no external data sources other than something that's about. That's not a link to another file. That's a link to a kind of picker that I've written using the double dollar. There's no link there. In file B, which is on the right, there is also no external data sources at all. Okay. This file is talking to a machine file, which I'll show in a minute. I'll prove that that's got no external data sources. And in this file on the left, if I manage security, there's a couple of accounts in there. Those are what they are. I'd now like to add a file for this particular individual into this file here with the privilege set, and we'll just say the privilege set is testing. This tells me there is no account in that file. That's what I've just demonstrated. And I'd like to just add the account. And there we go, it's done. So if I go over to here and manage security, there in fact now is an account for that person with that privilege set. What I'd like to do temporarily is to now suspend their account. So we'll do that. It's now showing us there is an account, but it's inactive. If I go back into file A, then that account is now in fact turned off. It's using the methodology that I kind of outlined, using this file in the middle, which let's just demonstrate that. Again, this has no external hard-coded data references. Literally, I'm passing from the user's file into this file the command that says go off into that other file, and this has created 3 new records from the actions I've just done. which I'm logging at the same time as I'm doing it. So initially I said, could you create this account? That's the delete record. There we go. There's the add record. Could you add that account into that file? This is an encrypted up password using that privilege set on that server. And what I've got is an answer that says, yeah, there was no error, and I did it in that file over there. What I then did was suspend that same account, and again, no error in that file. So if I just go back and unsuspend this person, so reactivate the account, it's now active, and there's now a new record saying, yep, you activated that account in that file. So that's calling this file in the middle from this file, but doing an action in this file over here, and none of those are linked. So therefore, this file could be anywhere. This file could be that I'm using in the middle could be on any server. So we've been using this while we have a testing server so that I can demonstrate that things work. And it means at some point this file can be then just moved and repointed at the live server because it's literally just an address. And I'm telling it which file and on which server do I want you to operate on. So in this case, it is the test server, the test file, but that allows me while I'm testing to quickly set up accounts, give them a password, give them a privilege set. It means I can test that the privilege sets then work for the purpose of the exercise. So so I think some of the other possibilities that we've got are things like PubSub, where we create records in a queue file, doing things like change logs, error logs, success logs. I think I might have this open. There we go. So here's a change log where I'm just passing a JSON object that says, hey, here's what changed on this record between when I started editing the record and when I finished editing the record. And in this particular case, I've also modified a JavaScript library to be able to visualize those two changes so that, again, somebody who really wants to know this information can see, yes, that field got changed. When it was changed from 100,000 to 100,001. Those are the actual changes that were made. I don't have to give them access to the record. And obviously what this means is I can record every single change that's made, whereas obviously audit log may or may not be that your best friend because you're adding data to the table itself as opposed to putting the data away somewhere else. And like I say, in this particular case, one of the directors wants to see this stuff. But I don't particularly want him to have access to lots of tables and fields in the source file because it just feels like too much hard work, and it'll ask too many questions some of the time is the real truth, and that enables me to kind of avoid that. So there we go. Questions or comments, or have a look at something else. Fire away.
Excellent presentation, John. Really fascinating stuff.
Thank you.
Makes me want to dash out there and try it. Finding a moment would be fun, but I'm sure lots of people have got questions, so dash in there, guys.
Hi, John. Nice work on that. One of the things I wanted to ask, I had a question to ask. You know, you said the time codes that come back and the formats of time codes. Does the time codes have milliseconds on them or not?
So depending on what so if you're asking for field data, then it's whatever the field is.
Right.
So another 19.6 thing that again may or may not be just around the corner. You know, we currently have get UTC milliseconds.
Yeah.
We're about to get UTC microseconds. in 19.6. So we would be able, we can do things in our scripts with a greater accuracy and return that data. That's just a quick little heads up. That's not that far away. But obviously anything that you're, so one of the issues that I have run into is if you're running this across multiple servers, then obviously you're still based on server time. So if your servers are not synchronized to exactly the same time, you can end up with a small amount of time difference between when you initiated the call and when the call comes back, or when the call's actioned. So clearly there's a delay in the kind of in the sending it, but you have to be careful about what you're measuring. But then obviously
that's you sort of know for when we're doing our bots, because you know with our scenario we've got like the bot system, we've got 4 bots, 4 servers, all calling scripts on different machines and different time zones. And so from that point of view, yeah, try and okay, it's useful to know. Just synchronize the clocks where you can. So.
Yeah.
I like the idea of updating the passwords and user account. I'm going to pass it on to Penny because I think that's going to be invaluable, because at the moment we have
a genuine,
database to do that. So.
If you're at your size of organization, or potentially even smaller, and you've got Active Directory and Open Directory and somebody can do it, then clearly that's where it should live with IT. It does involve you kind of having to use groups and move to a different methodology, and obviously potentially with where we're going with Claris ID, that means it's kind of not this stuff anymore. But I have found that with some of the smaller organizations that I work for, sub 10 people, 5 to 10 users, having this as an ability to say, right, you're in charge of the users, you can do this, you can add anybody you like, and you set up their password, and then there's a button then to then email the person saying, hey, we've set up this, and this is what your password would be. But because it's native FileMaker scripts and it absolutely works, you don't have to get IT involved, or you don't have to have somebody who's a non-technical user. All you need to do is train them how to use this, and then they can manage their own users forever. And it clearly does work. So.
Absolutely, John. That's a classic use case, because I've had that situation myself, where exactly what you said is the case, and people need to be able to manage their users themselves. Perfect.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm showing it as a standalone file so I can do this talk around how OData can make it work. Clearly, all that functionality can be built into just the single file, but you still use the machine file to do all of the running the script steps, because obviously that work has been done. That's the whole point about modular. Could you pick this up and move it into something else? It doesn't have to live in its own file as well. So.
Yeah, that's good, John. John, I had a system I've used for years, my own little password management for multiple file systems and whatever, but obviously I had to replicate that across. And it was just copying one batch of scripts from one file to another. Yeah. But it had to be its own individual for each solution and was a bit of a pain. So, yeah, good. Like the idea of that.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, trying to avoid, because Mr. Blackwell is potentially on the call.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Absolutely avoiding. This is not kind of some other SATs, scheme to be able to get around things. This is setting up the account so that the user can log in with the proper FileMaker username and password.
Yeah.
But again, it means the IT department who might be running this don't need a username and password in the main system, because the task that they are assigned is this. They just have access to this one file. It means that that user file is protected from other people. So only IT and HR and you as a full access have access to that piece of information and functionality. So.
And you can enforce password rules on it as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is a lot easier in other ways. Yeah, absolutely. Cool.
Anyone else? There's some questions in the chat about
just
data allowance, but Doug's answered that. So if you're wondering about data allowance, go and look in the chat.
Yes, that is correct. The data API and OData use the are using the same thing. Essentially, in my case, I just never use the data API. So I'm using it all with OData. If you were doing a mixed system, you'd have to be aware of that and just keep track of it, which you can now do through the server API. You can get back an answer about how much data you've used. If you're doing it properly and you're controlling how much data is in fact being passed back to you, I think, as we pointed out a very long time ago, you have to go some when you're only getting back 300 bytes at a time to work through 2 gig in a year per user. You do really have to go some. But obviously, it's just about understanding the context in which we work. That is one of the outer boundaries of the way that we're allowed to work. So.
Yeah, another great implementation I've seen with OData and consulting in that was I have a friend developer who is developing for a very big client that they have branches in United States, a couple of in Europe, and they are using a very old legacy system, and they had to synchronize everything.
Yep.
And he asked me, how should I do this? Because I don't want to create layouts. I don't want to check for every field. And what we built was basically a way to get all the fields that he's interested in, because in OData you can specify the exact fields, and then
Correct.
Using the modification timestamp, he's just selecting the tables and the fields, he's synchronizing, and they're like, I think it's 12 files, and it's rapid fast. We did tests against Data API, and it was faster for a specific table and field and modification timestamp count. Yeah, it's great when you need to be context unaware. It's definitely the tool to get to use.
No, I agree. I'm using it live with somebody who uses iPads in the field doing inspections, and I'm using OData for their sync back, so I can sync. I can go, okay, you've done 200 things today, but I just sync one record at a time in a loop. It means that I know whether or not it's been successful. I can create the parent record and then subsequently upload the photos as a second upload. I know it's all happened. I get back the answer to what is the unique ID now in the parent record at home to prove that it's been done, which means if they modify the record if they go back tomorrow and modify an inspection, because I also know it has been uploaded, I can now patch the record, not create the record. That's working really successfully for them. Sync is a bit of a nightmare, but that also was an experiment, but it's absolutely working with somebody, and they're out in the field 2 or 3 times a week with 2 or 3 iPads. So similar kind of thing.
If there aren't any more questions, anyone got any more questions last minute? We can always, I'm sure John will hold on for the virtual bar afterwards.
I will.
I thought I was fairly confident you might do that, John. Thank you very much. So yes, let's take any more questions and discussion into the virtual bar afterwards for that.
Nice one, John. Super.
Excellent, John. Yeah, really good. Really nice presentation, as always. Really interesting stuff. And Doug is here. And are you ready, Doug, to jump in?
Yes, I am.
Over to you then.
Cool. I might, obviously, because my AirPods are dying. It's looking for headphones. I think I've lost all of them.
We can
leave it up. That's cool. I'm just recharging. Should be fine. Good evening, everyone. So tonight I am going to talk a bit about the next update of FileMaker that's coming out very soon, which is 19.6. So we've been talking about it for quite a few months. I think Peter Nelson in one of our last webinar was mentioning some of the work that we're doing. Essentially, it's kind of what the sort of boring updates where for most customers, they're actually not going to find any extremely interesting new features. There's a couple of new nice stuff, but basically what we're doing is we're trying to actually give more tools to developers like yourself to actually be able to actually do your work better. Do you think we've actually essentially done is actually done a lot of work on the server side to be able to actually give back all the tools that we kind of removed. We moved from 19.6 to from 16 to 17, where we changed basically gaming console, moving away from a Java-based environment, which is dreadfully hard for us to manage, to a Node.js sort of backend system. And what we were doing that at the time, there was a lot of features that we had to actually remove because we couldn't actually get it to work properly with what we had. And so over the last, I would say 2-3 years, we've been working to essentially bring those back to you. I'm quickly going to share my screen. So 19.6 coming out very soon. I can't give you data. Basically, if I talk about it, it's pretty much very soon. The 19.6 version of FileMaker is what we use actually for the core of Claris Pro. So Claris Pro, Claris Server on the new Claris platform, they're actually based on the same currently version of FileMaker. So the Claris Pro that we have on the market now, Claris Server, for those who actually use them, is based on 19.5. We're going to launch 19.6 very soon, and we'll have an update of Claris Pro and Claris Server and Claris Go very soon as well to actually leverage all the new stuff that we have in 19.6. Quick intro for those who know me. My name is Doug Wallis. I'm the product manager for the Claris FileMaker. I don't do everything on Claris FileMaker, but I do quite a bit of work nowadays on that, mostly on that. So essentially what we're trying to actually sort of give you is tools that you've been asking for a long time in different ways. And so like we have a huge number of features coming from developers saying, we want this, we want this, we want this. And then we had to actually sort of clean all the information out, to actually come up with similar sort of point of view on how we could actually do that. One of the stuff that we actually sort of been getting a lot of requests for a long time is basically more control around transactions. So potentially, or actually, since the FileMaker 7, we kind of built inside the FileMaker a system to actually do transaction, but there was no control for the developer to be able to actually sort of stop or revert some of the work that had been done on the transaction. So you create like a field, you create a record basically in FileMaker Pro, and then the file basically is hosted on the server. FileMaker does pretty much all the work for you. The issue is like you have no control. So it's kind of hard for, like, if you have a lot of information to actually send across between a client and a server, sometimes you want to basically, you need a bit of control. And so you might actually need to do like breaks in your scripts, or do multiple scripts to just verify the information is being copied properly before you get to the next step. And so what we've actually done is create 3 new script steps in FileMaker Pro, which is basically the open transaction, the revert transaction, and the commit transaction. And what it's doing is it's letting you actually live or get your script to actually live in a local environment for as long as you want, where you'll be able to actually do all the script that you want to do, all the various modification of data. And then depending on some of the errors you're getting or some of the response that you're getting from the server, you can decide either to actually commit the whole transaction in one go, or basically revert back to what you had before. So this is pretty much what it does. The idea is to open up transaction for you to be able to actually do whatever you want out of it. This is a version 1. We've had a lot of people playing with it on the ETS. We talked a bit through at the what is it called, Auto Enter Live. I talked a bit with Todd Wallis and Wim. Claire was there. Danny Mac did a great session on it again. Once we launch 19.6, we're going to have some information for partners of how they actually see how they could use that. But the idea is for you to start playing with it and to see whether it's going to work. The one thing we say is do not change all your script to start using transactions, because it's not basically meant to run everything in FileMaker. But if you do find some usage in the way that you have sometimes to sort of make some huge changes of batches to records in one time, and you want to basically be able to control the whole operation, this type of script step will be useful. I'll do a quick demo afterwards of how it sort of gets used and some of the caveats to actually look out. when you're actually using that. The second stuff on top of that is basically getting all those tools that we had in FileMaker Server 16 back into FileMaker 19. Some actually new ones, some basically stuff that was there before that we removed, that we put it back on place. First one is around clone only backup option. It's basically a quick way to actually do a backup of your file without first backing up the data. So it's kind of useful when you basically a clone environment of your file. Then you want to do that quickly, and then you can actually afterwards do another backup if you want to. The other thing we've brought back is admin roles that we took out in 17, and it's back on now in 19. And you'll be able to actually create, so I'll show you in the demo, but you'll be able to actually sort of create roles based on database privileges, schedule privileges, a whole set of stuff that you can modify. And so you can give IT or your clients whatever sort of access to the machine, to the server that they need based on those admin roles. We've brought back as well, oops, my headphone is dying.
Can you hear me okay? Yes, cool. And then the last one we had as well, we've added additional databases for and container folder support. That is something that we vaguely had. Not everything was working properly on the previous version, so we brought it back. And hopefully that'll be able to actually give you more control of where your database is backed up or containers are being used for. Again, all of those actually are available through the FileMaker Server Admin Console and the FileMaker Admin API. One other thing that we roll well, so basically alignment with the parent company. We are now supporting signing with Apple inside the FileMaker Server Admin Console. So before you had just Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and sort of your bespoke OAuth providers they could add. Now we've got basically signing with Apple support. You can use Apple IDs for customers or non-Apple IDs, work the same way. The only thing you need for that is you need an Apple developer account, so the $99 one, and you will need to actually set up the email notification through Apple ID. So we'll create a blog entry to explain to people how to actually use it. You can't do groups inside of signing with Apple, so you have to actually create manual accounts inside your FileMaker app if you want to use signing with Apple. Another thing we're actually bringing into the admin API is to be able to authenticate through a web token and basically giving a key to someone else so that they can actually have access to your admin sort of system. Again, this is more for IT. We are building a blog entry with the engineering team to go through all the sort of stuff that has to be done to actually get that working. But it's kind of useful for sort of organizations where they want IT to be able to actually sort of check whether the server is working properly. They don't want really to give them a username and password, and they can just do that by giving them a token. The next one that we had is, again, we are restricting the admin console by IP addresses. That was something that was requested by a lot of companies, and especially hosting companies. So we put that back into the system. Again, it's fully accessible through FileMaker Server Admin Console and the Admin API. And the last one that we have on the list, kind of boring one, but basically is we are enabling by default the filter database just to make it harder for people to actually be able to view your files on your server. The request mainly for that is coming from customers that have a lot of servers or open servers where people can actually just quite easily figure out the files that they have. So we just want to make it easier for people to protect their customers' sort of database files on their network. And the last one is kind of features and security update that we have. So FileMaker 19.6 will be fully supporting the latest version of Apple, macOS Ventura, iOS 16 and iPad 16. There are some issues with Ventura at the time. Most of them, sadly, are not coming from us. So it's not stuff that we can actually fix easily. We know there's a couple of bugs with the printing system on Ventura. We're hoping this to be fixed quite quickly by Apple. We're looking on our end just to see whether there's stuff that we could do to make it easier. But what we'll probably have to do for a while is write some workarounds to actually use the printing option properly with between FileMaker and Ventura. We've been kind of working kind of hard on WebDirect as well to actually sort of get it to work to a better level. Essentially, when Peter Nelson, the VP of engineering, was talking about it back in before the summer, he was mentioning that we were going to try to actually get up to 1,000 user connection on a FileMaker web database system. We've been able to get to 600 on Ubuntu Linux using Nginx. So basically it's 120 concurrent connection per machine at any one time. We are hoping to, with the next version, so 19.7 coming feature, to actually sort of really improve that. Essentially where we're having problems is with the version of Java that we use, so it's still Java 11. One of the work that we'll be starting to do is really sort of improve on this Java 11 and actually update that so that we can increase the amount of usage and to make the whole system a lot more stable. So even though we know that not that many customers do need 600 or even 1,000 concurrent connections, we're making sure that the idea is that if you just want 100 and you want that to be very stable, you should be able to actually do it on any environment. So a lot of the work that you've seen with Claris Server and other work is being essentially done by the engineering on the Ubuntu side of it, because we have more control, and that's some of the stuff that we're doing for Claris Studio. But we're still working on the Windows and the Mac version to be able to actually support that. The other thing is we do find that the Nginx and the Vaadin framework that we use seems to be working better than Apache or Microsoft IS. And so a lot of the work is being done on Nginx. And so we'll see whether eventually we can support properly Nginx both on the Mac and the Windows on the FileMaker side to get you to be able to actually use that. Again, on the Web Direct, we've done a lot of work in the CSS caching to actually just make the whole thing, sorry, there's a spelling mistake, to make the whole thing a bit better, and the web publishing interface to actually work in a nicer way and more reactive way. One of the reasons we actually pushed the launch is there was an OpenSSL, so we updated to OpenSSL version 3 for 19.6. There was a kind of a big bug in version 3, and so 3.0 is the latest fully supported, which came out a couple of weeks ago. So we had to do a lot of retesting to be able to actually get to the final version 19.6, but that's all settled. And there's about 100 bugs, like larger bugs that we actually fixed. There's a bit more sort of smaller one, but it's a bit less than the other one because a lot of it was stuff that we were doing around transaction and the web admin console. So I'm going to start first of all with the admin console. So it looks basically the same as before. The only place where you're going to find quite a few, well, few changes is on the backup side of it. So within the backup settings, sorry, it should be in here. That one. Sorry, it's on the ATS. Where's the thing I was going to show you on this one? I'll come back to me anyway. On the administration, so that's where we've actually added the admin role. So from here, you can create a role, and then you have all the options to set up which database folder they can use. You will give the username and password, and then you'll be able to actually define the privilege that they actually have access to. So you could actually set up an account for the IT management team, and so that the only thing they can do is basically view the logs and maybe do some schedules or actions on the schedules, but won't do too much around it. And so if I log in my server with the account that I created, basically I'll have a shortened version, and based on my privileges, I'll be able to actually see the databases, see the backups, have access to configuration, be able to actually verify some scripts and view the logs, but I won't be able to actually sort of do anything else around that. So similar stuff that we had a long time ago that we kind of removed. For the Apple one, you'll find it here. So amongst the other ones that we have, Apple Connect is the internet one that we use at Apple, so you won't get access to this one. Restrict the access, you can find it here. So basically you just have to enable it. Same as you would do in FileMaker Server 16 is list the address of IP addresses that get access to it, and then you'll be fully connected. One of the things that we've actually added on top of it, and there was a lot of people, a lot of people actually asking for it, is the problem is when you actually shut down your database, so the basically database server, once it's actually shut down, the admin console basically would shut down at the same time. So what we've done for this version is to give the option to be able to actually shut down the database server in the background. So it's going to close all my stuff in the back. But still basically have access to the admin console. So my admin console is still working the same as before. The only thing basically is actually down is the database server, and I can do all the stuff that I had before. I can basically go through the database, run some backups, all the management that I need to do basically on my server can be done without having the database server running, and so the files not running, and so that way you can do everything you need without the problem of maybe crashing the whole system. So we had a request asking for that, so we put it back in the product. And then you can go through all the stuff that you have, and similar here, I've got the same access based on my privilege set or my role to modify everything that I need. I'm going to click on that. Hopefully it's going to restart properly. There we go. Now it's fully restarted. It's going to basically verify the file and then just restart them quickly, I hope. Those are quite big files, so it's maybe going to take a bit of time. Just that one in the background here. So they're up and running now. Same this one, up and running. So always fine. So kind of useful when you want to do some server management without having to, having either to go through the admin API. Now you can do everything with the admin console. So on the transaction stuff, I've got this stupid file that I created for me, but it's basically a way for me to sort of manage some large amount of data and do some weird stuff around it. And I'm going to basically just show you a couple of stuff on the transactions. Hopefully that will work. So I'm going to open basically the same file on 2 different versions of FileMaker that I have on my machine. Which is nice because it was working 10 minutes ago. There you go. So this is basically data for all businesses in the UK. I think I removed a few because there were so many businesses. I think I removed quite a bit out of it. I've got my 2 stuff open. So this should be a 1945. Can't remember. Anyway, so I've got a small script basically that looks through all the cities in the UK and basically picks out anyone, does a quick count, does a sort, and then writes basically the data back. So it basically tells me the time it was done, the amount of entries in the town, the time name, the client, the server is doing it, and the time it's actually taken to be able to actually do it. So kind of straightforward. The idea is, let's say you have 2 users basically that normally would actually be running sort of scripts to actually modify data on the server. And so I'm going to start for this one. Basically, it's going to do a loop of doing the search 25 times on the server, but it's doing it basically while I'm actually opening or going to transaction mode. So it's going to basically open the transaction, run the script 25 times, and basically it's going to ask me whether I want to actually commit a transaction, actually revert back. So it's going to go and start doing it. It's going to start writing entries in here, and I'm going to start doing the same on the other version at the same time. So once it's done, basically the 25 entries. So sometimes some cities are actually quite big, like London, takes a bit more time. So this one basically is finished, and then this one will finish quite soon. Keep running. So this one basically I've written 25 new records in this file. Maybe the other way around. Sorry. So this one has got 25 extra new ones, and this one's got 25 extra new ones. But actually, both those files haven't actually written anything back to the main data file. All of that is actually in my local machine, actually my local version of FileMaker. So even though I've got 25 new entries here and 25 new entries, if I were to open a third client, they will basically both be on 50 because nothing's been sent to the cache file. Nothing has been sent for the time being. So it's basically all stored in those 2 cache environments, those 2 copies of FileMaker. So if basically all good is, if I do cancel, it's going to basically wipe all the sort of entries that I've actually written. If I do OK, it's going to basically write those 25 entries. So on this one, I'm going to go, OK, I want to write them. So basically it's going to 75. this one hasn't really changed because basically it's still in this transaction sort of mode. And so if I do cancel, even though it says 75, I've got 75 in its memory, but the proper system is actually on 75. So if I do cancel, it basically reverts back. But the 75 that I've got here are not the one from my script, actually from this script running on that machine or that client. If I rerun the stuff another time and get the same stuff run vaguely the same way, with the time and date, basically, that's where it's going to basically be careful. Where people are going to be careful about is that when you're running basically transaction, nothing's being written to sort of the data file or even the cache file. So whatever you're doing while in transaction mode is going to affect the whole process of your business logic behind it. So this one is finished, should be done. So this one has both to basically say 100. So if I do all good on this one, it's going to basically add 25. And if I add this one, it will go to 125. And then this one refreshes afterwards. So basically you have this power to actually decide how you want to basically when and how you want to send the data. But just to be careful that if you're running and you have multiple people doing the same stuff at the same time and they're writing information, you don't want to basically get everything to be done astray. So one of the things that really sort of pushing for around transaction is for people to start playing with it before starting implementing in every solution, because it's going to basically change some of the way, or a lot of the way that that the system actually works. Other thing is we had on the ETS and even so people this vision that you could actually sort of keep the data locally for as long as you wanted and then send it whenever you want to. That's not really true. As soon as you basically your FileMaker, basically you're shutting your FileMaker, it basically loses all the data. And so when you're in a script, the data stays there, but as soon as you actually leave the script, either you commit the data or you revert back. And so it's not a tool to actually use as a synchronization. If you only use synchronization, just basically the stuff that John was talking about and use OData, because you'll have way more control. But the principle of the transaction that we put is not to actually create a offline synchronization engine. It's not going to work even from day one.
Doug, quick question, if you don't mind. What happens if you're halfway through a script and it crashes on the client?
It will revert back.
Because you haven't committed anything? Because
you haven't committed everything. So it will basically revert back to the point when you first started your script.
Okay.
So issue is watch out for record IDs, because the system, when you actually start basically creating the entries, every time it's going to create a record ID, or it's actually going to pick the record ID. And so once you actually, if you're running multiple stuff and then record ID is important, it could create some issues. Mm-hmm. Serial numbers, that's the other one that's a bit of a pain.
Yeah.
So essentially, if you're running like I'm doing, and I may be the next demo basically, but if you're writing basically, if you're running the same script on two different machines at the same time, running this exact same stuff, and then you're incrementing serial numbers, basically the other machine is not going to know that the other one started or finished. Yeah. And so they'll basically be using the same ones potentially. So if you have a lot of stuff based on serial numbers and stuff like that, that's where you need to actually sort of watch out.
So what would happen in that instance? Because if you've put serial number to be unique in the schema and you commit both clients, what happens?
The second one, the one that finishes last basically is going to have errors coming up.
Okay, I don't do that anyhow. I have exactly that model. So I've got 4 print machines in our dispatch in the warehouse. So what I do is when each machine comes in, we create a unique batch ID for the machine. So we tie the IP address of the machine to the serial number. So we get around it that way. So each machine is unique when we do it per batch to get around that process. How would it fare, say, for example, in that scenario where I'm creating I've got 5,000 dockets to go out and I'm creating the batch ID. I'm already answering this question. No, don't do it transactionally. But if I create 5,000 PDFs locally and then commit the script to all container fields, what would happen?
So
so that will be gigs of data of PDFs.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's PDF, so the containers, it's still gonna basically, like if it's just data inside FileMaker fields, apart from containers, in a lot of cases, it will actually be quicker because it's just basically writing everything in one go. It's not writing and then pitching up to see, it's just basically just writing everything in one go. So not front, it's going to be quicker. If you're writing the information to the container, it will try to actually do it in one go. So it should be a bit quicker. Whether it's basically going to massive amount of changes or increase the speed, I'm not really sure of that. It's something to actually test, but
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I like the idea of being able to undo it. The fact is, you can just say, if I spot an error, I'll just roll back. So, which is nice.
So within the script step for revert, there's the whole sort of you can grab errors bit everywhere, and basically depending on errors that you have, you can decide to actually revert or do whatever whatever you want to do actually with the system. The one thing which is kind of cool as well with transactions with the script steps is you can run inside a transaction script multiple script out of context. So you don't actually have to actually sort of be in the same context. You could actually go in different areas, run your scripts, and then basically do your transactions. And so when we're saying like basically when you create an invoice and you want information to be sort of sent into different areas of your system, you could actually do it with being out of context.
But again, you need to be in the same window. Yeah, you need to be in the same window.
You need to stick to the same window, yeah.
The other thing you're saying it uses the cache, is that superseding the switch parameter to say don't write any cache locally to use transactions? Because there's an option in the switch when you open a FileMaker file, when you open FileMaker as an application, say no local cache. You can create that user file.
Yeah, but that will, so it's not really going into the cache file. We kind of created an environment within the memory, so it's not in the cache itself, in the memory of FileMaker to be able to actually write this information and then eventually send it.
Okay.
So it's one of those sort of features that I would say start playing with it. I know there's a lot of like one of the main advocate for that transaction script steps was Vince Menano. He does some stuff, and especially does one for Apple internally, where it's a global environment, and for him it's a real pain to be able to actually do some of the writings of information into different servers around the planet. So for him, having script transactions means that he can basically shorten, first of all, the amount of stuff that he has to do in multiple scripts, but he can send information in one go to different servers, and that will really help him to do all this stuff really quickly. So,
Doug, I had a quick question.
Yeah.
So whilst something's being processed transactionally, is that record locked?
It's not locked because it's not locked.
Okay. So again, so we're talking about the last one wins in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
You have the same sort of, your environment doesn't change. It's just you're doing it in fake mode, and then once you decided it's all good, then you can send it. Which is basically going to mean that in other cases you're going to have to actually check that the information you want to write is not basically going to screw up the whole system because you're writing data that shouldn't actually be written at this time. So.
Yeah.
The one thing which is kind of cool is if you want to create, if you need to actually create like an invoice that has batches in multiple environments, you could actually write everything in memory, check everything's fine, and if all the calculation is fine, and just go send it, and it'll just basically write everything in one go into all the environments. So it's one of the it has some real advantages because you can do some checking, quicker than before, but then you've got to be careful when you do it and how much of that you want to really sort of.
So if I get that right, you can check the transactional state of a record.
Yeah.
Okay. And if someone writes something else behind that, what would happen then?
You would basically override the data that person actually is rewritten.
It'd be the same as the current server, Joel. If you commit a record and then you commit again, all it's doing is committing in a block, though. So in effect,
no, I wasn't talking about committing. Doug was saying that you can run checks whilst you're doing that transactional process and only commit when those checks are passed. So is that checking happening on those temporary in-memory records, or is it happening on the existing?
It's happening on a temporary memory.
Okay.
Yeah. So if I'm interpreting that right, it's on the state of when you started the script. It knows the state of the record. You process everything through. It compares that against the original that it knew at the start to the server. If there's been any commits from another machine partway through that, you wouldn't know about. Then when you commit that process, you'll overwrite any commits that were made in that time frame of you running. So do bear in mind, I'm reading that. If you run a transactional script that takes 10 minutes to process, there could have been a lot of changes in that time, and you would just commit over the changes.
Yeah. So if the idea of the script is basically to be really quick. So like that's what we're trying to sort of, and from some of the tests that we've done, the idea is when you had a script that was actually kind of very long because you had to go through different places, run your solution with the script transactions, you'll be able to actually reduce that. And so the time it's going to take to compute, sort of get all the data, verify it, and then does the calculations in the data is going to be quite short. So if you're basically putting your script in pause mode for like 10 minutes, then the whole idea basically just goes away. So it's again something to play with. Do not change all your scripts using script transactions from day one, because you're going to go bonkers quite quickly.
Yeah. One question, Doug, is it possible to, if you've got uncommitted records, is it possible to either export them as CSV or PDF, or create a physical artifact of those uncommitted? Oh, sorry, the not uncommitted, but the sort of in the midst of a transaction.
Well, you got access to every script step, so I haven't tried it, but yeah, you would be able to actually do an export of that.
So there's a potential. So I mean, I think it's a really bad idea for someone to do this, but there's the potential for someone to then produce, say, a PDF of a document that actually, if the transaction was reverted, they might have produced a PDF of something that no longer exists.
Don't do that.
I agree. Don't do that.
Yeah. Don't please document on something you're going to revert. Yeah, but fair enough. It's which is why some of the people in the ETS were saying that there needs to be a lot more like on the error trapping side of it, like a lot more control basically from the solution. To which we're saying is the only thing we offer you is the script steps and the way to be able to control with the revert what you want to do. But it's not going to check basically that everything works properly, because we can't check the whole systems that the director is actually accurate. So the idea says we give you those new script steps, you play with it, you create what you need out of it. We'll do some blogs around some of the stuff that we actually get back from other sort of like people like yourself. If you come up with errors or stuff that actually don't really work, then we'll try to actually sort of make sure people are actually aware of it. But we didn't want to actually put too much control around it, so that we were basically having to create another layer of control over your scripts, which is absolute nightmare. So
no, understood. Okay. Yeah, that's good. I mean, we're all going to need to do a lot of testing before implementing this in live systems.
Yeah.
One thing I forgot to ask, Doug, is this public knowledge, this stuff, or do I need to remove it from the recording?
Well, from that, no, that's fine. By the time people watch it,
by the time you got the recording out, Gary,
it'll be out by 10:30.
Yeah, you're fibbing.
Yeah. Just a thought on the commit. When you create serial numbers, you can create them on record creation or on commit. So that
could
presumably when you're in the middle of this transaction, you may not have the serial number. It's only when you confirm it, then you actually get the serial number.
Yeah, but you can end up with the same errors if you had like two users using exactly the same script at exactly the same time.
But it would only, if two people are doing it at once, would the serial number not have reset the starting point, or is it, because you can set the serial numbers going on first batch. Someone's got 23, the next person commits their batch, 23. I would have gone 23, but now someone's taken that, it's 33.
It does if one does it after the other, but if they're doing it at the same time.
So it would pre-select the serial number before commit.
Yeah, but if you're having like two, I mean, imagine you're basically creating like 10,000 invoices a minute, and you have a script scheduling in the background, you'll end up with the same problem. So
well, I'm not about. So I'm thinking about two users creating invoices. And once okay, fine. I'm doing all the invoices for the west side, and I'm doing the invoices for the east side. If they do those pretty much at the same time, if the commits don't happen, if it happens on commit, the serial number will come out. Surely there wouldn't be a clash.
Session table, Tim.
Yeah, well,
yeah, that's exactly where you create a batch table that session. That's the way around it. The other side of you're explaining, Tim, is the fact that if you've got a commit in there and then you're taking that record ID to use further on in the script on a relationship, transaction's going to not really help you, because you have to commit the thing in one go to then grab the IDs to then move on to the next script step. So you'll have to be careful about how you create the scripts and how you use them, I think.
Or for invoices, for example, they may want a serial number on it, but I wouldn't use a serial number for an ID. I'd use a UUID. Pick up, so that would be okay. It wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah,
it's just purely for display of serial numbers. I'm thinking of things that's the way.
In fact, you can't have invoices that have the same serial number.
No, exactly. But I'll need to do some tests. But from what Doug has said, I don't think it would be an issue if they're on commit rather than on creation. I normally have them on creation because that's the safest way. We just change that.
I'm very confident that the serial number on commit is issued by the server, whereas the on creation is issued by the local machine. So I'm very confident. I wouldn't put a bet on it, but I'm very confident that is what happens. So what Doug said was that if you have a serial number on creation, obviously if the same script is running the same time, those serial numbers would bump. But the on commit, when you check the serial number on commit, I need to refresh my certification memory, but I'm very confident that is issued by the server only. So it might not be an issue when that
was my interpretation of my very basic experimentation. So okay, good.
And so one of the things that we are thinking of doing, again, a bit of work. So there's a lot of stuff in how, like, opening basically Pandora box with a transaction. We started sort of internally talking about the idea of when does stuff get written and what's the order and how does and so one of the things we're going to try to do, but it's going to take is to go through again, like, stuff that we've done for a long time in terms of how the calculation works when data gets written at sort of what level, so that we can give more information sort of to developers to better understand, hey, when you're doing this is the order that it's going to basically get everything to actually work. It's a very tedious task because we have to, well, first of all, there's a lot of script steps and functions, and then we need to work out exactly where we want to, what side of it we want to start with, so that we can actually help you better understand some of the stuff that FileMaker does in the background.
Okay.
Douglas, can I ask you one more question on the serials portion?
Yeah.
So from what has been discussed, and there's a couple things that I was not expecting in what has been said. So does that suggest that, for instance, for fields that had auto entry set to serial, where in the past we would not necessarily check for uniqueness, that it would perhaps be a good thing for us to start enforcing validation for uniqueness on those, given how you're saying that transaction may provoke collisions on the serials. I would assume that the validation would still be enforced and would get the transaction to fail under those circumstances.
Yeah, it would create issues for you. Like before, basically, you don't actually have to worry too much about it because the FileMaker sort of engine was doing everything for you. So yeah, in the case that you want to use serial numbers, and in numbers actually, especially if they're not like UUIDs, so potentially you can have like duplicate numbers, then you'll need to actually sort of figure a way to be able to actually monitor that all the way through your scripts.
Part of what you need to be able to do, Robert, is so in the scenario where two people are running this at the same time and they've got the same bunch of serial numbers, first person commits, that's fine. Second person commits, it gets an error because there's a validation error, but you don't want to throw away all the work you just did. But if you then ran the same script again, transactionally, it would pick up new serial numbers from the highest serial number that had been created. So I think that's what because I'm on the ETS, been playing with it. There's a little bit around what Doug says is right. You can't just apply transactions to everything. It requires some rethinking. And the question is there more work to do because of the problem that it creates, rather than trying to work around that and just don't do it in the first place? Because actually you'd be better off at the moment keeping additional methodologies. But it would work if there's a problem with validation, that'll throw an error. And then you can say, okay, we'll just run that again then. And it'll pick up new serial numbers from the lowest new available serial number, and therefore would be able to commit the second time through.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with the transaction failing on the validation and having to say, okay, well, we'll run the batch again, you know, and it's going to assign something new. It's just I was really expecting like serial assignment to remain server side and not to end up being offset to the workstations. So that one surprised me.
Yeah, so we're not changing the way that the internal stuff of FileMaker, we're just opening up how transaction, which is what I was saying is we need some documentation to actually explain in some cases when does the client does the work, when is the server doing the work, so that everyone kind of knows a bit more about some of that information. So it's not going to come soon, but at least we'll be able to actually sort of give you a bit of better vision of when transaction is really going to help you create a better system, when in some instances doing your way actually might be better.
One thing I mentioned on the backup, is there a way to do a backup? All right, let's take it from the backups because I didn't see it on the screen that you demoed. Is there a way to do a backup of a file without container data? Because this is what's killing me at the moment. So I want to back up the database, not the container data.
Yeah.
Can you do a backup without container?
I think data I can get by VMware and snapshot the machine and get all the data that's on the hard drive, not a problem. But what I want to do is a way of backing up the file that contains even external container data. At the moment, I've got a solution that takes over an hour to back up, because when I back the database up, it decides to back up all of the container data that's externally stored.
Gary, I think you can do it by using the second 3 or 4 versions ago, the additional external container data path. I don't remember how it's called.
Oh yeah, there was that. Yeah.
Was it reduced? And that will not back up your external storage.
Yeah, but it's not in the current version. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's
no,
gone.
it is. It is. It's not. I don't know about that. I'm not using it.
I'm just checking to see.
It's if you use the additional data,
additional database folders. No, there's not the external container data folder. There's a container data folder. Optional. That we're talking about.
Yeah.
I think Guy is right. I cannot see it in my admin console.
You can't. They stripped it out of the new version. That's the problem. It used to be there. Now it's not.
It's in 19.5.4.
Okay, so they brought it back in 19.5. I'm not on that. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm on 19.5.4.
So there's an option now to store the container data in a separate volume or a separate location.
But I'm confident and very sure that it used to be there.
Let me see what the help link says. Hang on that. When it gets there. Yeah, by default, the container data folder is not backed up with the databases.
Okay, fine. And that's in the later versions?
Yeah, 19.5.4 I'm on here. This client one I'm looking at.
Okay.
Doug, one question.
That's fine. Okay, I'll give that a go. It's fine. Thank you.
One question about the sign-in with Apple. Does this require any additional? Because I had a look in the documentation and I saw that it requires some Java web tokens and stuff like that. Is it easy to make it work? Is it just create an Apple developer account and get some keys and put it in there? Or
so the option. So when you go into your Apple account, Apple developer account, there's something called certificate keys and profiles and whatever. Then you create a new key. We use the so they have two systems in Apple. There's one called Earth Script or whatever, or Web Script, I think it is, which is basically what we normally use. It will give you a key, which you basically just have to copy into the FileMaker server admin console, and then you have to create all the user account as in your FileMaker file, and then you have two options. They can be so they can be Apple IDs or they can be non-Apple IDs. And then when people sign up, they have two options. They can use their email address, or they can hide the email address. And if they hide the email address, that's where we have to actually do the send notification inside the FileMaker server. The user will get inside the FileMaker Pro a request for the 6 digits. They'll come up from the sign up with Apple, and then they just type in and actually get access to it.
Okay.
So
sounds great.
It's kind of straightforward.
Does Touch ID and Face ID play with that, like every other Apple ID login?
If you've got your Apple ID and your Face ID sort of linked to one another, you'll be able to actually use that. We had to do, so the one thing was taking a bit of time, a bit of pain, is to be able to actually hide my email to be able to log in, which we have kind of to do to get approval from Apple. In our case, I imagine in most cases for FileMaker developer, it's not really useful to get someone to hide the email and just basically afterwards get a token. But it can be done if people want to. So
okay, thank you.
So there is a theoretical question, isn't it, Doug, about whether somebody could do that and use one of those temporary IDs that is effectively destroyed afterwards. So therefore, you could set up the Apple ID and never be able to get in because they'd used an email address from which they'll never ever get the email.
Because well, mine, if they've never signed, hang on,
so if you sign up but then say don't use that email address, use this one, and the email address you use is one of those,
it will ask you for the 6-digit ID. It will go back, and then when you start up FileMaker, it will come up with basically the 6-digit ID, which you will get from your Apple device.
Okay. All right. That's
whether you use hide my email or whether you use whatever they call it, like use
it'll still come to your device.
It will basically it goes all the way around to your Apple ID account and basically sends the 6-digit token to that device or the device linked to that account, and basically you just type it in. And it works on Pro, Go, and WebDirect. I think there's a couple of design issues on the Windows, not Edge, but people using, I think, Chrome will have maybe, I think everything kind of goes away, and the only thing that comes up is the box where you can type in the 6 digits. It's something on IE11 that we can't really fix, and we're not really. Well, there's nothing we can do really, because basically it's just the GS that
it's crap.
uses is too early. And before I forget, so yeah, we've done some update of OpenSSL, Node.js on the admin console. So if you have, or if yourself or customers are using IE11 to connect to the admin console, they won't be able to actually get in, because Node.js 16, I think the version that we use, doesn't support IE11 anymore. So hopefully most people are not using Internet Explorer nowadays, but there might be some people still out there using the old version. So they'll have to use Chrome to get it to work.
The only issue we had with 19.5 was the point of when it moved away from on Windows, is we had anything in the web viewer. So we were creating dynamic barcodes on labels in the web viewer. It just moved all of the graphics around. All of them moved literally overnight. So 60 machines in the warehouse, deployed them, none of them printed on the label, they all missed. So, we had to put a case statement in to realign based on the version. So because it uses a different version of web, the web API engine that rendered the label just didn't render it in the same graphical way, even though the code was the same. So
is that on Windows?
Yeah, Windows. Yeah, it's because of the update and not using it's moving onto Edge. That's the reason why. So we understand the reason why.
And the problem that we're having as well with the Edge web viewer too is that it's not, for some reason, they decided not to actually have everything that was in the previous version of the WebKit, whatever it's called, Trident or whatever. So there's a lot of features that we used to work properly, and they decided to actually remove it, which is kind of a pain, because like on the PDF at first, I think there was some stuff that was completely removed, so we had to actually add it back. So yeah, not everything is in there for the time being, which is a bit of a pain.
No, it's just one of those things. Test before deploying.
While you're trapped in the room, the PKI key thing, at the moment, so I do know that at the moment the only way to generate that is with a Python script. Are you going to make some more methods available to us that are a bit more friendly than having to open a terminal window and run Python?
For the time being, no.
Okay. Could you possibly request that?
Yeah. So the one thing, so currently what we're doing is we're doing the blog, so now there'll be the explanation of how to use it, and then one of the things that we're trying to work on is to kind of give a GS library that has everything inside it, and basically you can actually run it and add your stuff and work on that. So yeah, take a bit of time to actually get everything. But Python is something that, funnily enough, we are even internally getting more people to learn, and in some of the problems, well, on the whole platform, knowing Python could be useful in the future on some stuff. So
it's more the fact that it'll work, but then if you can only run the code programmatically if the unused bbox, the issue is you can't run it natively. Whereas obviously anything that's JavaScript, we can in fact run, because we've got all of the technology and the skills to be able to do that, to get back an answer.
So there's a question from Egbert: will this transaction replace the FileMaker style in the long run? Not really. What you might actually sort of end up having is probably more script steps or functions that actually give you a deeper control over some of the scripts that will basically some of the functioning of FileMaker or the Claris platform, so that it's easier for you to do more stuff with it. But yeah, that's we're not completely replacing. We're just basically opening up a lot of the stuff that would basically kind of close at first, so that you have more power over your solutions.
May I just say that it's always great to have Doug in a session. I really enjoy, because I think Doug is the only person that gives a business perspective and a technical perspective at the same time. Thank you.
Because no one from Claris is watching it, so I can say whatever I want. And Rosemary is a good friend, so I know she's not going to basically tell anyone in the US what I'm saying. So
I was going to say Rosemary's here, but that's fine.
Yeah. Doug, can I ask one other question? My session earlier, I was talking about OData,
yeah,
the OData standard, and I noticed that the FileMaker data API, sorry, not OData, OpenAPI. Sorry, John did OData. But the Claris FileMaker data API allows us to download the OpenAPI spec for the API, but the admin API doesn't. Would it be possible to add that to allow us to download the JSON doc that specified the?
Yeah, it should be in there, but I'll check it out.
I did also, Ian, I did also collar Robert while we're in Malmo and request that gets done as well. So,
oh, okay, cool.
If we have multiple people asking the same question,
yeah, I spoke to Romain from One More Thing, and he said that he'd managed to find it, but he said he basically had to dig through a bunch of HTML code to find where. And I've had a look around the server and I just couldn't find it anywhere. So anyway.
Let me take a note in my fake notepad so that.
Okay. Thanks.
Cool. I've got to go. Thanks, guys. Good to see you all. Hear you all again.
See you, Tim.
See you sometime. Cheers. Bye.
Are we, is this about time to go to the virtual bar, do you think, Gary?
I think so. It's about the right time to stop the recordings, and
yeah,
I can get a cut so I don't have to edit 4 hours of video or 5 hours of video and take a week. So that's fine.
In which case, many thanks to everyone who spoke. Ian, John, Doug, been fantastic. Nice to see you here, Rosemary.
I actually have one quick ask or announcement.
Yes, shoot.
You may or may not have seen that we have announced sign up to be notified when the free licensing is available.
Okay.
I'm going to drop a link in chat. I just need to go grab it. Please use it yourself. Feel free to share it with your colleagues, friends, customers. Anybody else who might be interested?
Okay, actually, Rosemary, got a quick question for you. Not so much a question, but just a comment that for those of us who don't yet have access to Claris Studio, who are kind of going to be given access to it at some point fairly soon, if you're able to do that before Christmas, we're probably going to have some spare time to spend looking at it. Whereas if we got access in the new year, we're probably going to be really, really busy and won't have as much time to look at it.
I will pass that along to the partner team.
Okay. Actually, I should probably email Marie and tell her that, but
yeah. Or
yeah, just a short note. I got my links today, but they don't work. So at least there is a progress in the right direction. Maybe we have to fix that.
All right, and I've got to drop for my next meeting. So
right, on that note then, I will stop the recording.